Imagine standing in a courtroom, accused of a crime you didn't commit, staring at a judge who holds your fate in her hands, only to realize she's the mother who abandoned you. Would you seek justice, revenge, or answers? This is the story of Isaiah Turner, a boy the system tried to erase. But when a buried truth is revealed in the most shocking way possible, it sets off a chain of events that will change everything. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. If you love stories of resilience, subscribe to Inspiring Stories Told and join the journey. The rain fell in thick sheets, drowning the city in darkness. Red and blue police lights sliced through the night, flashing off the shattered glass and burning embers of a luxury brownstone in the gated Westbridge Heights community. The acrid scent of smoke and gasoline clung to the air, mixing with the stench of wet pavement. On the slick streets below, a 13-year-old boy's screams were muffled by the relentless downpour. Isaiah Turner barely had time to react before rough hands yanked him off the ground, his sneakers skidding against the wet asphalt. He coughed as rainwater mixed with blood dribbled from the corner of his mouth. The cold steel of a squad cars had slammed into his chest as he was thrown forward, gasping for breath. You people never learn, do you? The voice was sharp, venomous. Detective Daniel Grayson tightened his grip on Isaiah's hoodie, yanking him upright before slamming him down again. Pain shot through Isaiah's ribs. He struggled, but the officer pressed a knee into his back, pinning him down like an animal. I didn't do anything. Isaiah choked out, his voice hoarse, frantic. His words vanished beneath the wailing sirens, swallowed by the chaos of shouting officers and crackling flames. He twisted his neck, trying to see past the flashing lights, past the sea of officers, but his vision blurred, partly from tears, partly from the blood trickling down his forehead. Across the street, two figures darted through an alley, their designer sneakers splashing through puddles. Isaiah recognized them immediately: Carter Jennings and Miles Peterson, two rich white boys from his school. The ones who had dared him to come with them tonight, who had whispered about a secret spot in the gated neighborhood. Isaiah had refused. He should have walked away. Instead, he had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Now, Carter and Miles were getting away, unseen, and Isaiah was on the ground, soaked, bruised, and being treated like a criminal. Got something here. Another officer, Officer Travis McCall, stepped forward, holding up a gold necklace. It glimmered under the flashing lights, raindrops sliding down its expensive chain. Isaiah's stomach dropped. Where did that come from? He had never seen that before in his life. But before he could protest, Grayson ripped his hoodie open and shoved the necklace into his pocket. His hands moved fast, expertly, like he had done this before. Isaiah froze in horror as the detective pulled the necklace back out, holding it up for the crowd of officers to see. Well, looks like our little friend here has sticky fingers. Grayson smirked as he held the necklace in front of Isaiah's face. Isaiah thrashed, his body shaking. No, that's not mine. A sharp slap cracked across his face, sending him reeling. Shut up, Grayson growled. He grabbed Isaiah's wrist and twisted it behind his back, slapping cold handcuffs onto him. The boy's body shook violently, from fear, from exhaustion, from the cold seeping through his bones. Isaiah Turner, Grayson announced smugly, as if the boy were some kind of trophy. You're under arrest for burglary and trespassing in a private residence. And since there was a fire involved, well? His smirk widened. You might be looking at felony charges, kid. Isaiah's blood turned to ice. Felony. He wasn't going home. Isaiah had never been to jail before, but he learned fast that the cold was the worst part. The tiny metal bench beneath him was freezing, soaking through his damp clothes. His hoodie was ripped from the scuffle, exposing the bruises forming along his arms. He tried to curl up, to keep warm, but his body wouldn't stop shaking. The cell stank of sweat and fear. A flickering light buzzed overhead, casting eerie shadows on the grimy walls. The other prisoners were older, mean-eyed men who stared at him like fresh prey. Isaiah squeezed his eyes shut. He couldn't cry. Not here. A loud clang jolted him awake. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. A familiar voice, Gloria Ramirez. Where is he? Her voice was sharp, filled with barely restrained fury. He's 13, for God's sake. You have no right to hold him without an attorney. A rough shove. A grunt. A door slamming. Then silence. Isaiah sat up, heart pounding. Gloria had come for him, but they wouldn't let her through. They were going to bury him in this place. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. Rows of onlookers, reporters, and legal officials sat stiffly in their seats, whispering amongst themselves. Isaiah's legs nearly buckled as he was dragged inside. His wrists ached from the cuffs. His face was swollen, lips split. Every step toward the defendant's table felt like walking to his own execution. He sat down, fingers trembling as they gripped the edge of the table. His lawyer, Marcus Bennett, leaned down. "Stay calm," he whispered. But Isaiah couldn't calm down. Not when he saw the judge. She was staring at him. Judge Olivia Sinclair. Her face was cold, unreadable. Blonde hair pinned back, crisp black robe pressed to perfection. But it was her eyes. Something in them sent an icy chill through Isaiah's spine. He knew those eyes. Somewhere. Somehow. His stomach twisted violently. The state of New York versus Isaiah Turner, the bailiff announced. Judge Sinclair nodded. Proceed. The prosecutor stood swiftly, adjusting his tie. Your Honor, the defendant is a known delinquent. A troubled youth with no parental guidance, no sense of responsibility. Isaiah clenched his fists. They caught him red-handed, stealing from a private home in Westbridge Heights. The prosecutor continued. This is not an innocent child. This is a criminal in the making. Isaiah's vision blurred. His blood pounded in his ears. Judge Sinclair didn't even flinch. She sat there, unmoved, unshaken, like she had already made up her mind. Then the prosecutor said something that made Isaiah's entire body go numb. Isaiah Turner has no known parents. The words hit harder than any punch, any shove. He had always known he was alone. But hearing it said out loud, in front of strangers, in front of a judge who felt familiar in a way that terrified him, it felt like a sentence worse than prison. Isaiah's breath caught. His eyes snapped up, locking onto Judge Sinclair's pale face. She was staring at him now, not with cold detachment, but with something else, something dangerous. And Isaiah, despite everything, despite the terror clawing up his throat, knew she recognized him too. Isaiah's heart pounded against his ribs like a drum, his breath shallow and uneven. Something wasn't right. Judge Olivia Sinclair had barely looked at him throughout the trial, her focus on the paperwork in front of her, scribbling notes with a cold detachment. But now, something had shifted. Isaiah could feel it. The way her hand trembled slightly as she turned a page. The tightness in her jaw. The way her eyes flickered up toward him, then away, as if she was forcing herself to stay indifferent. But Isaiah had seen her face before. It wasn't in this courtroom. Not on the news. Not in any of the foster homes he'd been shuffled through. Somewhere else. Somewhere buried deep in the part of his mind he never dared to visit. His hands clenched into fists, fingernails digging into his palms. A blurry memory surfaced, unfamiliar, yet undeniable. A woman, his mother, holding him in a hospital room. Her face was shadowed, but her voice. I love you. I love you so much. But I can't keep you. Isaiah's chest constricted, a sharp, unbearable pressure filling his lungs. The air in the courtroom suddenly felt too thick, too suffocating. His vision blurred, his ears ringing. He gritted his teeth. His entire life, he had been told he was alone, that no one wanted him. But now, his pulse thundered as he suddenly stood, the metal chair legs scraping against the courtroom floor. The room stilled. Isaiah stared at the woman behind the bench, his voice trembling, but loud enough to cut through the silence like a blade. You're my mother. A sharp gasp rippled through the room, like a wildfire spreading through dry wood. The prosecutor's pen clattered onto the desk. The bailiff took a step forward, hand twitching toward his baton. Reporters in the back snapped to attention, pens scratching furiously against their notepads. A murmur ran through the crowd, a mix of confusion, disbelief, and curiosity. Judge Sinclair's hand froze mid-stroke. The pen in her fingers trembled before she set it down carefully, like a loaded weapon she didn't want to trigger. For the first time since the trial started, she looked directly at Isaiah. Her face went pale, as if the blood had been drained from her body. A flicker of something, asterisk, recognition, horror, regret, asterisk, flashed in her cold blue eyes before she quickly masked it. That's enough. Her voice was sharp, but it wavered. Isaiah felt his knees wobble, but he planted his feet, grounding himself in the storm of emotions raging inside him. He couldn't let her dismiss him. Not again. You left me, he said, voice raw with anger and betrayal. His entire body shook, his fists clenched so tightly his nails nearly broke skin. You gave me away. Judge Sinclair's jaw tensed, her fingers curling around the gavel like she wanted to crush it. The bailiff took another step forward, but Isaiah didn't care. He didn't stop. He couldn't. His voice cracked as he stepped toward the bench. And now you're sending me to prison? The tension reached a breaking point. A woman in the audience gasped audibly. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." The prosecutor adjusted his tie nervously, eyes darting between Isaiah and Judge Sinclair. She was visibly shaking now. For years, she had built a life of power, control, and order. But here, in this moment, it was all crumbling around her. And Isaiah could see it. Judge Sinclair opened her mouth, but no words came out. The polished courtroom, the authoritative bench, the walls she had spent decades building around herself, it was all closing in. She saw his eyes. Deep brown, wide, desperate, the same eyes that had looked up at her all those years ago in that hospital bed. The same baby she had sworn she wouldn't think about. The same baby she had walked away from. Her hands gripped the desk so hard her knuckles turned white. She tried to force herself back into control. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had worked too hard for too long. She had buried this part of her life, locked it away so tightly that it had felt almost like it had never existed. But now he was here, and he was looking at her like she was the villain in his story. Because she was. Recess, she suddenly barked, her voice breaking as she slammed the gavel down. Bang. This court is in recess. She stood so quickly her chair nearly toppled over. She didn't wait for protocol. Didn't care about the murmurs, the gasps, the whispers chasing after her as she pushed through the door behind the bench, disappearing into her chambers. The door slammed shut, and for the first time in his life, Isaiah saw her run. The courtroom exploded into noise. Reporters scrambled to take notes. Some rushed out the door, already calling their editors. Did you hear what he said? Someone whispered. The judge is his mother? No way. This is huge. Isaiah's legs felt weak. His heart still pounded violently in his chest, but now it was drowning in confusion. Was he right? Was she really his mother? His head swam with emotions he wasn't ready to face. Anger, pain, hope. His lawyer, Marcus Bennett, was at his side in an instant. Kid, he whispered urgently, gripping Isaiah's shoulder. Are you sure about this? Isaiah's throat was dry. He wasn't sure about anything anymore. But the way she looked at him, the fear in her eyes, the silence in her response. She knew. That was all the proof he needed. Before he could say anything, a firm hand landed on his other shoulder. He turned and saw Gloria Ramirez. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were glassy, filled with emotion. I tried to tell you, she whispered. I tried to tell you the truth before, Isaiah, but I wasn't allowed. Isaiah's breath hitched. He struggled to say the words, to believe them. Gloria nodded. Yes. Her voice was barely above a whisper. She's your mother. Isaiah's knees buckled. His chest felt too tight, too full, too heavy with emotions he couldn't control. He had spent years convincing himself he didn't care who his mother was, that it didn't matter. But it did. It mattered more than anything. And now, the woman who abandoned him, the woman who should have protected him, was the same one holding the gavel over his future. What would you do if you stood face to face with the person who abandoned you, only to realize they now held the power to decide your future? Isaiah's world has just shattered, but the fight isn't over. How do you feel about Judge Sinclair? Does she deserve redemption, or is it too late? Comment your thoughts below, hit that like button to support Isaiah, and don't forget to subscribe for the next part of this emotional, heart-stopping journey. Stay tuned, because the truth is unraveling fast, and what happens next will leave you speechless. Judge Olivia Sinclair slammed the door behind her, twisting the lock with trembling fingers. Her breath came in sharp, uneven gasps as she leaned against the wooden door, pressing her back into it as if the weight of the world was trying to crush her. This wasn't happening. Her perfectly ordered world, the one she had built with precision, power, and control, was collapsing before her eyes. Her heart pounded violently against her ribs, the echo of Isaiah's words still ringing in her ears. You're my mother." She squeezed her eyes shut, but she couldn't unhear it, couldn't erase the raw pain in his voice. Her hand shook as she staggered across the room, yanking open a drawer in her polished mahogany desk. The past was clawing its way back, and she couldn't outrun it anymore. Her fingers found the smooth edges of an old, tattered envelope. Slowly, with a hesitance that made her breath catch, she pulled out a photograph. It was worn, its edges curled from years of being hidden away, yet the image remained painfully clear. A newborn baby wrapped in a hospital blanket, his face tiny, perfect, innocent. The last time she had seen him. Olivia's throat tightened as she traced her finger along the baby's soft features. She had promised herself she would never look at this photo again, never let herself feel. But now, that same baby had stood in her courtroom, staring at her with those same brown eyes, filled not with innocence but with a pain that crushed her chest. Her breath hitched. Isaiah, the name she had never dared to say out loud. She pressed the photograph to her chest, her body trembling as a single tear escaped and dripped onto the worn paper. "No, this isn't happening," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. But it was. It had always been. And now, the past was here to collect its debt. 18 years ago. The night air was thick with humidity, the weight of the city pressing down on her as she sat on the stiff hospital bed. The walls were sterile. The fluorescent lights buzzed like a reminder of what she was about to lose. In her arms, the tiniest, most fragile thing she had ever seen. Her baby boy. His little fingers curled weakly around hers, his breath soft against her skin. A sob tore through her chest, but she bit it back, clenching her jaw. She couldn't cry. Not in front of them. Not in front of her father, standing near the window, his face a storm of disappointment and cold calculation. "This is the only way, Olivia," he said, his voice sharp, unwavering. She shook her head, holding the baby closer, like she could shield him from the inevitable. "I can take care of him," she whispered, her voice breaking. Her mother sighed, sitting down beside her, smoothing a hand over Olivia's blonde hair. "No, sweetheart. You can't." Her father stepped forward, towering over her. "You think you can have a career with a mixed-race baby?" His words were like poison in the air. "A black child? Olivia?" Olivia flinched. "This isn't just about you," he continued, his voice calm, methodical. "It's about your future. Your name. You're going to law school. You're going to be a judge. You don't get to make mistakes." A mistake. That's what they saw him as. She felt sick. She looked down at her baby, his tiny lips, his deep brown eyes already filled with quiet curiosity. "Not a mistake. Never a mistake. I won't." Her voice wavered. "I won't give him up." Her father's eyes darkened. "You will." A man in a suit appeared at the door, a social worker holding a clipboard. A contract. A final decision. Olivia's vision blurred as she felt her mother's soft but firm hand on hers, guiding it toward the pen. "Sign it, sweetheart," she whispered. The room spun around her. Her fingers hovered over the paper, shaking. Her father's voice cut through the haze. "If you keep him, you lose everything." She swallowed the sob that threatened to choke her. And then, with a final, soul-crushing breath, she signed. A loud bang shattered Olivia's thoughts. She gasped, snapping back to the present, Just as the door to her chambers burst open, Gloria Ramirez stormed in, rage radiating from her like heat off pavement. Her dark eyes burned as she stepped forward, her hands clenched into fists. "You knew." Olivia stiffened, the photograph still clutched in her fingers. Gloria's voice trembled with fury, with disbelief. "You knew he was yours," she spat, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "And you were going to let them lock him away?" Olivia flinched as if she had been struck. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Gloria's nostrils flared, her voice turning sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. "For years, I tried to find out who his parents were," she hissed. "For years, I fought for him, tried to keep him out of the system. And now, I find out his mother was sitting on the damn bench." Olivia's breath hitched. No," Gloria snapped. Don't you dare try to explain this away. You abandoned him, and now you were about to sign off on throwing him into the system again." Olivia felt the walls closing in. She was trapped. This was her nightmare unraveling in real time. And then, her office phone rang. The sound made Olivia's stomach twist. She knew who it was before she even answered. With shaking hands, she picked up the receiver. A cold, measured voice greeted her. "Olivia." Judge Harrison Wells. Her mentor. Her handler. She swallowed hard. "Sir, you think you can fix this?" His voice was calm. Too calm. A chill crawled up her spine. "You're not in control anymore," he continued. "That boy, he's already marked for the system." Olivia's fingers dug into the desk. "He's just a child." There was silence on the other end, then a soft, chilling chuckle. "There are no children in this game, Olivia. Just pawns." Her throat tightened. "You stay quiet," he instructed. "This never happened. Or you'll lose everything." Click. The line went dead. The room spun. Her chest rose and fell rapidly as Gloria watched her, waiting for an answer. And for the first time, Olivia realized she had no idea what to do. Because for the first time in 18 years, she wanted to fight back. Isaiah barely felt his feet as he was dragged through the freezing halls of the courthouse the next morning. His body ached from the brutal night in juvenile detention, every step sending a fresh wave of pain through his ribs. The guards hadn't cared who he was. They had beaten him, not just with their fists, but with their silence. Their indifference. "You're just another one of them," one of them had muttered before slamming him into the wall. Now, as he was shoved into the courtroom, his lips split, his eyes swollen shut, the whispers in the crowd turned into a low murmur of shock. Isaiah felt their eyes on him. But the only gaze that mattered, the one that sent a fresh wave of betrayal surging through him, was Judge Sinclair's. She sat on the bench, her hands clasped tightly together, her shoulders rigid, her blue eyes locked on him with something that almost looked like horror. Isaiah didn't care. She had let this happen. Her lips parted, just slightly, as if she wanted to say something, but then, Detective Daniel Grayson shifted in his seat at the prosecutor's table, and his smirk stole whatever words she had planned to say. Isaiah clenched his fists so hard his nails dug into his skin. That smirk. Grayson's victory was written all over his face. He had won. This was how the system worked. No one cared about the truth. Isaiah's chest burned with something too raw, too heavy to be just anger. It was hopelessness. And for the first time, he started to believe that maybe he really was alone. The doors to the courtroom slammed open. Gasps rippled through the air as a girl burst in, her dark curls damp from the rain outside, her breath coming in sharp, frantic bursts. She clutched a folder in her trembling hands, her brown eyes scanning the room desperately until they landed on Isaiah. Isaiah's heart stopped. Jasmine. For a moment, he forgot how to breathe. He hadn't seen her since they were little, since they had been separated in the foster system. A family had taken her, but not him. But she was here now, and in her hands. "I found them." Jasmine's voice rang through the courtroom, high, clear, and defiant. She didn't hesitate. She marched toward Isaiah's defense attorney, Marcus Bennett, and shoved the documents into his hands. "His adoption papers," she said breathlessly. Her hands shook as she pointed, not at Isaiah, not at the prosecutor, but at the woman on the bench. At Judge Olivia Sinclair. "She's his mother." The courtroom exploded. A reporter's pin dropped to the floor. The jury gasped. Someone in the gallery whispered, "No. No way." The prosecutor stumbled back, his face pale as if the truth had physically struck him. Olivia Sinclair didn't move. She sat there, frozen, her entire world caving in on itself in real time. Isaiah stared at her, his heart slamming against his chest, watching for her reaction. But she said nothing. She just looked, shattered. Marcus Bennett tore through the documents, his hands shaking. "Your Honor," he called out, his voice cracking with disbelief. This changes everything. The judge should have recused herself from this case immediately." The gallery erupted into shouts. How long did she know? She was going to let him rot in prison. This is corruption. The bailiff stepped forward cautiously, his eyes darting between Sinclair and the prosecution table. Judge Harrison Wells, seated near the front, stood abruptly, his face darkening. He whispered something to Detective Grayson. And that's when Isaiah saw it. The way Grayson's smirk flickered, just slightly. The way his fingers twitched toward his pocket. Isaiah didn't think. "He's trying to run," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos like a whip. All at once, everything happened at once. Grayson shot up from his seat, but so did the bailiff, grabbing for his weapon. Judge Wells turned, slipping toward the side exit, but reporters were already surging forward, blocking his escape. Sinclair's breathing turned erratic, her hands gripping the edges of her desk as panic overtook her entire face. Isaiah rose from his seat, his body trembling with adrenaline. For so long, he had thought he was powerless. But now he saw the truth. The voices crashed over each other, chaos swallowing the room whole. But then, Olivia Sinclair stood. Enough. Her voice was hoarse, raw, but for the first time, it carried the weight of someone who wasn't afraid anymore. She looked at Isaiah, really looked at him. And then she turned to the court, her heart pounding, knowing what she had to do. "I can't do this," she whispered. Then louder, firmer, as her voice cut through the courtroom like a final blow. "I can't do this." Silence. Everyone stilled, eyes locked onto the judge who had spent her whole career pretending to be untouchable. Sinclair's hands trembled, but she forced herself to look directly at the bailiff. "The charges against Isaiah Turner are hereby dismissed." The prosecutor paled. Grayson stiffened. Sinclair's next words sealed her fate. "And I will be stepping down as judge immediately." Isaiah's vision blurred. His heart felt like it was being crushed inside his chest, his emotions swinging wildly between disbelief and something he couldn't name. For the first time, Sinclair wasn't hiding. She wasn't pretending she didn't know him. She had finally, chosen him over her career. But the moment the words left her mouth, two uniformed officers stepped forward. Judge Harrison Wells' voice sliced through the tension. "Arrest her." Sinclair flinched. She turned, her stomach dropping, as the officers grabbed her wrists, locking cold steel cuffs around them. The courtroom exploded again. She was no longer the judge. She was now the accused. A second pair of handcuffs clicked shut. Detective Grayson shoved against the bailiff, cursing under his breath, but it was over. "Daniel Grayson," the officer said loudly. "You are under arrest for evidence tampering, misconduct, and wrongful imprisonment." Judge Harrison Wells barely made it 2 steps before a group of reporters swarmed him, cameras flashing. "Judge Wells, did you order the cover-up? Did you know Isaiah Turner was Sinclair's son? Was this all planned?" Wells' jaw clenched. His hands balled into fists. "I want my lawyer." But even as he tried to maintain his composure, Isaiah saw it. The panic in his eyes. They weren't in control anymore. They had lost. Isaiah stood in the center of the chaos, his hands trembling. Jasmine reached for him, wrapping her arms around him in a tight embrace. His breath hitched. For the first time in forever. He wasn't alone. And as he looked towards Sinclair, her blue eyes filled with something broken, something almost like remorse, he realized something else. She wasn't alone either. She had lost everything. But maybe, just maybe, she had finally done something right. The city of New York was alive with outrage. The streets pulsed with thousands of voices, a roaring storm of anger and demand for justice. Protesters marched in the streets outside the courthouse, holding up signs that read "Justice for Isaiah" and "End corrupt courts." The air vibrated with chants, the anger of a city that had seen too many young black boys swallowed by a system designed to break them. But Isaiah Turner was free. He walked out of the courthouse that evening, the cold air biting against his skin, his heart hammering against his ribs. The cameras flashed, reporters shouting his name, but Isaiah couldn't hear them. His mind was spinning, his emotions tangled in ways he couldn't untangle. For the first time in his life, he had won. But why didn't it feel like it? Jasmine's hand squeezed his, grounding him. "We did it," she whispered, her voice trembling with relief. "You're free, Isaiah." Isaiah swallowed, nodding slowly. But the weight on his chest didn't lift. Because freedom wasn't the same as peace. 3 days later, Isaiah sat on the cracked steps of the group home, staring up at the gray sky. The weight of everything still pressed on him, suffocating. The protests hadn't stopped. The news kept talking about it. His name was everywhere. And yet, he still felt like a kid who had been abandoned, a kid who had spent years waiting for someone who never came. A car pulled up in front of the home. Isaiah tensed. He already knew who it was before she stepped out. Judge Olivia Sinclair. But she wasn't a judge anymore. Her crisp black robe was gone, replaced with a simple gray coat, her once proud posture now slightly hunched. She looked smaller than she had in the courtroom. She hesitated for a moment, gripping the car door, as if debating whether to walk away. Then, she took a slow, measured step forward. Isaiah stood, his fists clenched. "I don't want your apology," he said, his voice sharp, cold. Sinclair swallowed hard, stopping a few feet away. "I know," she said softly. The wind held between them, filling the silence that stretched too long, too painfully. Sinclair looked down at the ground, her hands trembling. "I don't deserve forgiveness," she admitted, "but I want to try." Isaiah's breath hitched. The words sliced through him like a blade. For years, he had imagined what he would say to her, how he would scream at her, make her feel the same pain she had made him feel. But now that she was here, broken in front of him, he didn't feel anger. He just felt tired. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw it. The regret, the shame, the truth that she would never undo what she had done. Isaiah exhaled, his voice shaking. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you." Sinclair nodded, her shoulders stiffening as if bracing herself for the blow. Isaiah took a step forward. "But I want to know why." Months passed. The news cycle moved on. The protests slowly faded. The world stopped talking about Isaiah Turner. But his life was only just beginning. Sinclair didn't disappear. She came to see him. Not often. Not too much. But enough. She never pushed him. Never forced him to talk. She just showed up. She helped him with his schoolwork, listened when he needed to talk, sat in the stands when he played basketball. She was still a stranger. But she wasn't running anymore. And for Isaiah, that meant something. One afternoon, as they sat outside the group home, watching kids play in the distance, Sinclair took a deep breath. "I filed the paperwork," she said quietly. Isaiah frowned. "For what?" She turned to face him, her hands clasped in her lap. "To adopt you." Isaiah felt the words like a punch to the gut. He looked away, his chest rising and falling too fast. She was giving him a choice. For once, he wasn't being taken away, thrown into another home, another system. She was giving him the power to decide. His fingers curled into the fabric of his jeans, his throat tight. "This doesn't fix everything," he whispered. Sinclair nodded. "I know." The silence stretched. Then, slowly, so slowly it felt like time had stopped, Isaiah reached out. His fingers brushed against hers. Sinclair inhaled sharply, her eyes shining with something too deep for words. "It's a start," he said. And for the first time, it felt like the past wasn't pulling him down. It was something they could build from, together. Isaiah's story is not just his own. It is a reflection of countless voices that have been silenced, ignored, and erased by a system designed to break them. How many young black boys have been labeled criminals before they even had a chance to prove who they really are? How many children have been abandoned, thrown into a world that tells them they are unwanted, unworthy, unseen? This was never just about one courtroom, one trial, or one corrupt system. This was about truth, about a boy who was supposed to disappear, who was meant to be forgotten. But he didn't disappear. He didn't stay silent. And in the end, he wasn't alone. This story teaches us that justice isn't given, it's fought for. It teaches us that corruption thrives in silence, that the powerful will always try to erase the inconvenient, and that sometimes the people you think will protect you are the ones who hurt you the most. But it also teaches us something even greater, that we are not defined by our past, that we are not bound to the choices others made for us. Isaiah had every reason to walk away, every reason to hate, every reason to let the pain of what was stolen from him consume him. But he made a different choice. He demanded answers. He forced the truth into the light. And in the end, when the person who had hurt him the most reached out, he didn't shut the door. He didn't forgive instantly. He didn't pretend the pain wasn't real. But he chose to take the first step. And that takes more strength than anything. Because healing isn't about forgetting. It's not about erasing the past. It's about deciding that the past will not define you. Isaiah's story is one of resilience, of courage, of choosing to fight even when the world tells you not to. But his story is not over. There are more battles ahead, more truths to uncover, more struggles to overcome. And that's why we need you. If this story moved you, if you believe that justice matters, that truth matters, that every Isaiah in the world deserves to be heard, then stand with him. Show your support by hitting the like button, because every like is a voice saying, "We see you. We stand with you." Subscribe to the channel so you never miss what happens next, because this fight isn't over. There are more stories to tell, more truths to expose, more voices to uplift. And together, we can make sure they are heard. So tell us, what would you do if you were in Isaiah's shoes? Would you have made the same choices? Would you have taken Sinclair's hand? Drop a comment below, join the conversation, and be part of the change. Because this story isn't just Isaiah's. It belongs to all of us.